All right, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a Path of Exile 2 build that I'm really excited about. We're going to be breaking down a Warbringer build, the Warrior Ascendancy class, for those of you that are keeping track at home. That takes defense and really uses it to amp up the offense. We've got a detailed guide as our source material, so we'll be pulling out some of the interesting parts of that. And what makes this Warbringer build so interesting is that it uses something called Jade Stacks for defense, but combines those with some really cool armor-breaking mechanics to really tear into those enemies.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting combination because it means you can take a punch. You can stand there and really kind of take some hits while at the same time you're sort of wearing down your opponent's defenses. It's not just hitting hard, it's about hitting strategically with this build.
Yeah, that sounds super satisfying. Like a 1-2 punch of toughness, but with a lot of thought behind it. So let's start with the foundation of the build. The guide highlights 4 key Ascendancy nodes, right? And each one kind of seems to feed into this idea of being both a defensive powerhouse, but also a damage dealer at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. And it's really cool that the guide chooses these 4 out of the 8 that are possible. They really kind of show off the strengths of the Warbringer. So, for example, one of the nodes is called Anvil's Weight. And it actually lets you break down a portion of an enemy's armor every time you hit them.
Whoa. So you're like constantly chipping away at their defenses with every attack. So even if you're up against a really tough enemy, you can kind of whittle them down more quickly.
Exactly, and that's just one layer of this build. Another node called Jade Heritage gives you access to a skill called Encase in Jade. And you can think of that as like a temporary emergency shield.
Oh, okay. So if things get a little too spicy, you can pop this shield and just shrug off damage for a bit. But how does this tie into the Jade Stacks that you mentioned earlier?
Well, the shield absorbs damage based on how many Jade Stacks you've got built up. These stacks, they accumulate as you fight, and they're a resource. And managing them is key to surviving those really tough encounters.
So it's not like you're just passively building up defense. You're actually actively managing something that impacts your survivability. I like that. So what about the other 2 nodes? I noticed the guide mentioned Totems, and I'm really curious about those.
Yeah, so the other 2 nodes are Answered Call and Wooden Wall, and these are where the totems really come into play. Answered Call allows your totems to actually summon these helpful spirits, and they not only add to your damage output, but they actually act as decoys, drawing enemy fire away from you.
Oh, so you're basically building this little spirit army that both protects and attacks at the same time. That's clever.
Yeah, and then Wooden Wall adds another layer of defense. By redirecting some of the damage that you would take onto your totems, essentially they become these damage sponges.
Wait, so the totems are super important for staying alive then? It sounds like their placement would be really crucial. You wouldn't just want to plop them down anywhere, would you?
No, absolutely not. Wooden Wall really emphasizes the strategic placement of these totems. You have to think about where they'll be most effective in both drawing enemy fire and soaking up damage, all while still, supporting your own attacks. So it's not just like a set it and forget it kind of deal with the totems.
Wow. Sounds like you really have to be on top of things with this build. Managing Jade Stacks and placing those totems strategically and chipping away at the enemy's armor all at the same time. It's a lot to keep track of. But I gotta say, I'm already starting to see how all the pieces fit together to make a really unique play style.
Yeah, that's what's so cool about it. It really rewards thoughtful play and strategic decision making. And it's not just about defense either. Let's get into the skills that really bring the pain.
All right, let's talk damage. The guide mentions 2 main skills: Earthquake for area of effect damage and Bone Shatter for single target attacks. I'm already picturing myself as this unstoppable force summoning fissures in the earth and shattering bones with every swing.
Yeah, it's a pretty awesome image. Earthquake is all about controlling the battlefield. So imagine you're surrounded by enemies, you slam your weapon into the ground, fissures erupt, and the earth just splits open beneath your foes. The guide recommends using it with support gems like Fist of War for extra damage, Area of Effect to widen that impact zone, and Jagged Ground to leave behind those lingering patches of damage over time.
Well, those support gems sound like they really crank up the destructive potential of Earthquake. You're not just damaging enemies, you're shaping the terrain to your advantage and making it dangerous for them to even get close.
Clever.
So what about Bone Shatter? How does that skill play into the armor-breaking strategy we talked about before?
So Bone Shatter is your go-to for taking down single targets, especially those tougher enemies. It's a skill that combines both single target and area of effect damage, but what's really cool is that it triggers this shock wave whenever you land a heavy stun on an enemy. And remember, Anvil's weight is constantly breaking down enemy armor, Well, this is where that synergy really shines.
So you're weakening their armor, stunning them, and then hitting them with this massive shock wave that really capitalizes on their vulnerability. That's brutal. And I bet those support gems for Bone Shatter take things to a whole other level.
Oh, absolutely. The guide recommends gems like Impact Shockwave for even more shockwaves. Overpower to help you build up those stuns faster. Exploit weakness to punish those enemies with broken armor even more. And Dazing for some extra crowd control.
It sounds like every skill and support gem in this build is really carefully chosen to maximize both damage and control, like a well-oiled machine of destruction. But what about when you're facing a really nasty attack? We talked about Encase and Jade for those oh crap moments. But are there any other tools that help keep the Warbringer alive?
Yeah, so there's another totem that's really important for this build. Ancestral Warrior Totem not only summons helpful spirits like Answered Call, but it can also actually use any socketed mace skills you have equipped, so it adds even more versatility to your totems.
So you're getting both offensive and defensive support from a single totem. That's efficient. And of course, we can't forget about those Jade Stacks. Encase and Jade wouldn't be nearly as effective without them.
Yeah, managing those Jade Stacks is super important for making the most of your survivability. It's all about knowing when to use that shield to absorb a burst of damage and when to let those stacks build up for later. It adds another layer of resource management that really keeps you engaged in the fight.
So we've got these awesome defensive layers with the Jade Stacks totems and Encase and Jade. And we've got our powerful offensive skills with Earthquake and Bone Shatter, all supported by these carefully chosen gems. But what about the gear? What kind of weapons and armor does a Warbringer need to really shine?
So for the shield, the guide emphasizes picking one with a high block chance, so you can really make the most of your defenses. And for armor, you want to focus on maximizing your life, your resistances, and your armor. You know all the essentials for a really tough character.
So you're not just relying on the Jade Stacks and the totems, you're building a foundation of toughness with your gear choices. What about accessories?
The accessories are all about supporting the core elements of the build. So look for items that boost totem life and damage, increase stun duration, and amplify your physical damage.
So every piece of gear, every stat is working together to create this really cohesive and well-rounded Warbringer. I love how much thought goes into optimizing every single aspect of the build, but there's one piece of the puzzle we haven't really talked about yet. The passive skill tree.
Ah, the passive skill tree. The heart of Path of Exile's customization. This is where you can really fine-tune your Warbringer, pushing those strengths even further and really tailoring it to how you like to play.
Yeah, it's almost like taking this incredible blueprint that we've been discussing and adding your own personal touches.
Yeah.
But the passive skill tree can be a little overwhelming. There's so many nodes and paths to choose from. Where do you even begin?
Well, the guide actually gives us a roadmap for navigating this vast network of nodes. And for this Warbringer build, it recommends focusing on clusters that boost totem life and damage, armor block chance, physical damage, and stun duration. You're basically taking everything we've talked about. The totems, the armor, breaking the Jade shield, and amplifying their effectiveness through these carefully chosen passive skills.
It's like taking an already powerful engine and strapping a turbocharger onto it. You're taking all these strengths and weaving them together into this unstoppable force. But I gotta be honest, I still get a little intimidated by how complex the passive skill tree can be. Any tips for someone who's not exactly a Path of Exile veteran?
One way to approach it is to start with the keystones and then work your way outwards. Keystones are those really powerful nodes that fundamentally change how your character works. Think of them like the cornerstones of your build.
So for this Warbringer build, that might be a keystone that significantly buffs how effective your totems are. Or maybe one that increases the damage you deal to stunned enemies.
Exactly. You identify those keystones that align with the core strategy of your build, and then you start branching out from there, picking up those smaller nodes that complement the path you've chosen.
It's almost like building a network of roads with those keystones serving as major intersections that connect everything. I like that. But what if you realize you've gone down the wrong path? What if you want to tweak your build or try a different approach?
That's the beauty of Path of Exile. You're not locked into those choices. You can respect your passive skill points and experiment with different combinations until you find what feels right for you.
It's all about that journey of discovery, that constant tweaking and refining. That's what keeps Path of Exile so exciting.
And that's exactly what we encourage you to do. Don't be afraid to experiment, to deviate from the guide, and find what works best for how you like to play. After all, the guide is just a starting point. It's a foundation for you to build your own unique Warbringer on.
So we've got a really good understanding of this Warbringer build now.
Hmm.
The strengths, the gear, the skills, even how to approach that massive passive skill tree. But I'm curious, what does it actually feel like to play this build? I'm picturing a warrior who's like incredibly tough, but also a tactical mastermind at the same time.
Yeah, you're spot on. Imagine this. You're wading into battle, and you're strategically placing your totems to create this defensive perimeter around you. Enemies are swarming towards you, but you're not even phased. You've got that encasing jade ready to go if you need to absorb a big hit. And your totems are summoning those ancestral spirits to harass and distract your foes. You're like this wall of armor and jade, and you're in total control.
Okay, I'm already getting chills just thinking about it. So what's the next move? Do I just stand there and let the totems do all the work?
Not quite. Remember, this build is all about combining defense with strategic offense. So as those enemies get close, you unleash Earthquake. The ground splits open beneath them, creating chaos. You're controlling the battlefield, grouping them up, and softening them up for the kill.
Okay, feeling powerful already.
Yeah.
But what about those tougher enemies? The ones that don't go down with just one earthquake?
That's where Bone Shatter comes in. You lock onto a high-priority target, maybe one that's charging straight for your totems. You start hitting them with Bone Shatter. And because their armor is already weakened from Anvil's weight, you're dealing serious damage. Then, bam! You land that heavy stun, triggering that satisfying shockwave. It sends them reeling.
It really does sound like this build has an answer for every situation. Area of effect damage, single target, burst, incredible defenses. It's like the ultimate warrior package.
Yeah.
But let's talk weaknesses for a second. No build is perfect, right? What are some things to watch out for when playing this Warbringer?
You definitely have to be mindful of your totem placement. They're essential for both your defense and offense, so if they get destroyed quickly, you're going to be in a much more vulnerable position.
So protecting those totems is key. That makes sense. Any other potential pitfalls?
Managing those Jade Stacks is crucial. That encased Jade Shield is your lifeline in tough situations. But if you're not careful and you burn through all your stacks too quickly, you could be left open to a big burst of damage.
Yeah, it's like this high risk, high reward kind of gameplay. You got this incredible defensive tool, but you have to use it wisely.
I like it. So if I were to sum up this Warbringer build in a few words, I'd say it's like a strategic powerhouse. It's all about knowing when to strike, when to defend, and how to use all the tools you have to dominate the battlefield.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. It's a build that really rewards those players who enjoy a more tactical approach to combat. You're not just matching buttons, you're thinking several steps ahead. You're outmaneuvering your opponents and turning their strengths against them.
And that's what makes Path of Exile so great, right?
Yeah.
There's a build out there for every playstyle. And if you want to be that strategic mastermind who can withstand a beating and also dish out punishment, the Warbringer is waiting for you.
Absolutely. And remember, this guide is just a starting point. It's your journey, your Warbringer. Experiment, explore, and find what makes this build truly yours. Well said. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me. To all of our listeners out there, if you're ready to unleash your inner Warbringer and conquer the challenges of Path of Exile 2, we'll see you in Array class.